Hey guys, welcome to the fourth episode of Darshan Talks. We last discussed the idea of the three different types of patients, and Nirpal raised this idea of, well, does this introduce bias? And what is the impact of that bias?
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
We had Trishna just about to respond when we cut her off. So, Trishna, the floor is yours.
I think there's something really key here, which I think outside the advocacy community and maybe outside of industry that many people don't necessarily know about or they don't understand, is that in Europe anyway, because we don't have direct-to-consumer marketing of drugs. As a patient advocate, I will not do anything which is promotional for drugs. I'm not allowed to. It's, under the regulations, you can't. And even when I work with pharma companies, they aren't allowed to promote to me either, because that's just, it's in the regulations. What we're talking about is it's about the more holistic side of things. So, for example, disease awareness campaigns, making sure that the patient community is more informed. There are things which, yes, might be drug related. So if you've got a company that is launching a new drug and needs to produce a patient support program for it, then yes, you do need to engage with patients because you need to know what kind of support they may need. However, the patients that are engaged with, that engagement isn't necessarily going to be dependent on them taking that particular drug, because yes, that might be seen as bribery kind of thing. But
Trishna, it's around, again, I think it's not saying that one group trumps another. I think it's how effectively within research are we using it, those groups, because patient advocacy, you're absolutely right, add in so much value, and cross disease state are very organized and, sort of almost experts in the way they deal with, sort of providing feedback or marshalling where feedback needs to happen and not promoting, but, trying to get that engagement and be able to speak for the masses and with the masses. The problem that you then have is you're potentially having, if it's in isolation, two expert groups. You've got the research expertise with the patient expertise, and then the question comes back to, well, when you first introduced this, Trishna, we talked about folks living with the condition. My hypothesis is that, do you start to detract from that as you engage more and more with folks who become so expert in their thinking and how they're putting things together, that you lose sight of this really core group, a big group, which are just, trying to live with this condition. I think there's a perspective that you want to understand, what are they after? What are they looking for? When you're trying to deliver information from a research perspective, you want to talk to that broad audience versus the smaller, very organized and, these individuals who have become experts.
I understand that now. So there is that risk. However, that's about the company or industry recognizing the different values that the different groups of patients bring, and it's about bringing each of those patient groups in at the appropriate time and for the appropriate purposes. So like I said, if you want to know, market insights or you want to have insights into living day to day with a condition, then industry needs to recognize that there are these different types of patients out there. And for that particular, purpose, they need to be engaging with those patients by experience, which is the vast majority of people. If a company is like, for example, that patient group forum that I was just speaking about, then, you can't, the everyday average patient by experience won't necessarily have the skills or the knowledge to be able to provide the right kind of insight to help develop that kind of project. So unless industry recognizes that there are these different types of patients, they're not going to be engaging with the correct groups.
Yeah, that's the point. Is engaging with the correct groups. And again, from my experience, pharma companies are very comfortable working with advocacy groups because they find it easier to work with those guys. And you mentioned some great examples of which you need that. I think what I see is that same model is put to every use case. And that can't be right, because then in those scenarios where, you are, for example, putting together information where you need to get a perspective whether this makes any sense to a patient, then, that needs a different perspective and a different group that you need to be engaging with, and not just a broad brush on this one model that we know well and we know how to engage with them, and we're going to use that for whatever means that we have. So I love the way that you've broken this down. It's been really insightful, and I think it sort of confirmed in my perspective the things that we've been thinking about in my organization, is for the particular types of patients that are going to be required for the use cases that we are trying to support sponsors with, without labeling them in this way. I think we have been trying to think about, do we bring the masses to, to things that are going to get out to the general public, and getting their perspective, and where we have other scenarios where we want to engage with patients on, say, protocol design and all the regulatory type of work that we do with sponsors, then it is a different audience, it's a different type of group that we engage with.
Yeah, because it's also about making sure that, the people that you're engaging with, that they also understand the industry and they understand the restrictions and the limitations. They understand why there's regulation there, what may or may not be possible. Because if you have somebody in there who doesn't understand that, then, to be perfectly honest, they'll be very, very frustrated, and you're not going to be getting the right kind of advice and insights that you need in order to make whatever that particular engagement piece a success. I think that's really key, because, I've worked on projects where, things which might seem simple and they're not due to either legal or compliance reasons, but that's not had to be explained to me, because I understand the industry. I understand why certain things are the way that they are. And I think the other thing that also we need to remember is, with patient advocacy groups and patient associations and the charities, is that yes, they do represent the broad patient community. However, by virtue of being an organisation, they also have their own governance, they have their own agendas, which may or may not conflict with a particular project or a particular engagement piece. I know certain organisations who just won't work with industry because they believe that would perceive some kind of a bias, and they want to be seen as completely neutral. So all of those things need to be taken into account, which is why sometimes it's beneficial to, yes, engage with the patient advocacy groups, but also engage with individual patient advocates who are independent, which is what I call myself, because we work across different organisations with lots of different, companies and lots of different patient associations.
I'm going to call this because we're almost at the time limit, but thank you both of you for attending. I'm very, very excited to continue the conversation. Stay tuned for a lot more coming through. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you so much.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.